something on the page. So it should be momentarily. It will show up, and there we are. So this is Glenda Carroll, and welcome to Mystery Writers of America, the Northern California chapter. This is Facebook Saturday Live. And as you know, we've had this for about a year now, and this is where authors present short, focused talks on the craft of crime. It's been a great series, and I just want to let you know that we will be taking a break next month. So we won't be here in October, or we won't be here in September and October, but we will be here back in November. So today's speaker is Bryan Avery, and he's an award-winning poet, and he writes children's stories and books. And I was looking at his bio, and what I learned is that when he was 7, he received a book of the Bobbsey Twins magic book. And I wonder who out there remembers the Bobbsey Twins besides me, because boy, I read those books. So, and that was, I think, when you were about 7. That's what it said there that you got.
7, yeah.
So as I mentioned, he's going to be talking about writing mysteries for children and middle schoolers. So if you have any questions, put it in the comment section on Facebook, and we will get to those at the end of this chat. And so, Bryan, it is all yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenda. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And we'll get started. As Glenda said, I do write poetry, and I also write books for kids, and I write a lot of mysteries for kids as well. And what I wanted to talk about today was sort of how I got from writing mysteries for adults, which is where I started, to writing for kids. And I wanted to share some of the things that I learned along the way. So we'll start by talking about who we're writing for. We know we're writing for kids, but there are a number of different levels of books for kids. And so we're going to talk about where those are, and where I write, and where primarily you'll find most of the mysteries for kids. And then we'll talk about some of the tips and tricks I learned about writing for kids. And then about an interesting subject on reading levels, to understand what kinds of language and paragraph structure and different things like that work for kids depending on the levels that you're writing for. We'll talk about, since we're talking about mysteries, a little bit about violence in kids' books, and where you can get away with it, where you sometimes can't. And then I'll provide some information on kind of where to go next. And I'll talk a little bit about my journey and which resources helped me. So let's start with who you're writing for. There are really sort of 4 primary categories of children's books today. The first is picture books. And so these are generally for kids that are at that, starting to really understand, hey, this is a book, and can flip through it, but are still being read to. And it goes up to, 6 or 7, where kids are starting to learn to read themselves. And so these are things, everything from like the Dr. Seuss books to a lot of the picture book biographies. You see those sorts of things. They are typically 32 pages, and the reason for that is because of the way the books are constructed and the pages are cut. Sometimes you will see more than that, but if you're starting out as a picture book author, generally the conventional wisdom is to write it for 32 pages. They're typically 2,000 words or less. Generally, people will say they need to be about 500 words or less. But if you look at a lot of the picture books that are out in the market, you'll see that some of them do run longer. And of course, because they're picture books, they are heavily illustrated. And it changes a little bit about how you write the book, because a lot of what you write can be displayed in text, and so doesn't need to actually, or can be displayed in pictures, and so it doesn't need to be really described in the text. The next level up is chapter books, and these go from everywhere from the early reader chapter books up to much longer chapter books that almost start to bleed into kind of the middle grade area. These are generally for kids that are about 7 to 10 years old and are reading independently. They typically run about 1,500 words in that sort of early chapter book range, up to about 15,000 words. The sweet spot for these tends to be somewhere between about 6,000 and 10,000 words. And these are much shorter chapters. So you'll see chapters of anywhere from, 400 or 500 words up to maybe 700 or 800 words tends to be the case. Now, because they are so short, chapter books are also very thin, which means that they don't show up well on a shelf in a store. And so publishers generally tend to look at chapter books as needing to be part of a series. And so you'll see a lot of those. And these are things like, the Encyclopedia Brown series, Ron Roy's A to Z mystery series, things like that. And that allows the publisher to put out a number of books and then take up more space on a shelf. And it makes it more visible in a bookstore. After chapter books, kids start to go into reading middle grade novels. And so these are anywhere from 15,000 to 60,000 words, though it varies. You will see middle grade books that go up to 80, 90, even 100,000 words. But those tend to be from more established authors. Again, the sweet spot kind of in the middle of that 15,000 to 60,000 words. These have longer chapters. And here's where you'll start to see a lot more standalone books in addition to series. And particularly with mysteries, you'll see a lot of mystery series. And so things like Stuart Gibbs' Fun Jungle series, for example, James Ponti's City Spies. But you'll also see a lot of standalones let's see, what's a good standalone? So like Janae Marks from the Desk of Zoe Washington, which was nominated this past year for an Edgar Award. It's a good example of kind of a standalone. And then the last group, before you really start getting to adult books, is that young adult. And there's a lot of overlap between the young adult books and adult books. Generally, the difference tends to be the age of the protagonists. And so in this case, the protagonists tend to be teenagers, which is more relatable to young adults. In the young adult world, pretty much nothing is off limits. They cover a wide range of subjects and topics and issues that the characters deal with. What we're going to talk about today primarily will be chapter books and middle grade. And writing for those groups. And there are some differences there that we'll talk about. So I want to share some advice that I've gotten over my time writing for kids. I mentioned earlier I wrote for adults. I wrote short mysteries for adults for a long time, and then kind of stopped writing for a while and went back to writing. And when I did, by that time I had my daughter, and was spending a lot of time around children's books and found that I really liked them and decided in 2015 I wanted to write for kids. So I started doing research and trying to kind of understand what writing for kids was like, how it was different than writing for adults. And so this is some of the information that I've gleaned over the last 6 years writing for kids. The first thing is that children read up. And so that means a first grader likes to read about second and third graders. Third graders like to read about fourth and fifth graders, and so on. And so if you're writing a book that you're thinking a first grader would read, so like a chapter book mystery, for example, you'll find that a lot of chapter books feature kids that are 8 or 9 years old or in third grade. And the reason for that is the first and second graders that are reading those books tend to like to read up. You'll see the same thing in the middle grade space as well. A lot of middle grade books feature kids that are 12 or 13 years old in that 7th or 8th grade space as well. And those are being read by 4th and 5th and 6th graders who, again, like to read up. The other thing that's key here is the main characters should be kids. And really, in the case of a mystery, because they're the main characters, they should be the one to solve the mystery. One of the things that kids really seem to love about books is being able to kind of put themselves in the shoes of the main character, and that means they want to succeed at the end. And so having an adult come in and sort of solve the mystery for the kids at the end is really unsatisfying for them. Which leads me to a piece of advice that I've heard over and over again, and it's something that R.L. Stine, who writes the Goosebumps series and other series, always talks about, and that's get the adults out of the way. There's lots of ways to do that. In some cases, the adults are just too busy to pay attention. In other cases, the kids are just sort of dismissed by the adults, which is pretty easy to do in an amateur sleuth story. Even amateur sleuth stories for adults, you generally have the police sort of brushing the amateur sleuth off and so forth, and really leaving them on their own. And so if you do that, it gives the kids agency and allows them to work to solve the mystery. But it does create another question, which is, how will the kids solve a mystery? If it's a jewel heist, for example, what do the kids know? What resources do they have available to them that would help them solve a jewel heist that the police or the FBI or other adults could not? And so that's a really important part of building your characters, is to build characters who have skills that they could use to solve the kind of mystery that you're going to put in front of them. And then, as with all mysteries, be fair. That's not to say in children's books that you don't have things like an unreliable narrator, because you do. And oftentimes you have it more often because the kids are reporting on kind of their point of view and their understanding of events, and maybe misunderstanding things. But you still have to be fair with the mystery so that when you get to the end and provide the solution, people and readers can kind of say, yeah, I missed that, but I get how it turned out that way. And then another thing that's really key is don't overlook puzzles. Readers love puzzles. Chris Gravenstein, his wonderful Mr. Lemoncello's library series is built around puzzles. There's a lot of other books, and kids love to seek out books that have puzzles. And so if that's something that interests you or that you're good at, consider including it in your books. And then, kids love to laugh, right? And so look for places where you can inject humor. Some of the best-selling books are books that you'd kind of shake your head at and say, wow, how in the world is that a book? But kids absolutely love them. I mean, things like Captain Underpants, for example, are, every book that comes out, they're bestsellers. The Dog Man series by Dave Pilkey, same thing, because of the humor in that. If you look at like Stuart Gibbs' books, his Fun Jungle series, also the Moonbase Alpha series, there's so much humor injected in that. And so even though there are really tense situations, there are still situations that are funny and humorous and enjoyable. And lastly, I just want to say, children and all people love to see themselves in books. I think it's really important for them to see themselves in books. And so consider that when you're creating the world that your mystery exists in, make room for everyone. I think there are lots of ways to do it respectfully. And I think it's important to make sure that the world that is in our books represents the world that we live in. So I want to talk a little bit about reading levels. And one of the first resources that I was turned on to was from a company called Renaissance. And it is actually a resource I use every day when I'm writing. And there's a number of different things that they provide. So one is they have an accelerated reader book finder. So for any of you who have kids, you may be familiar with the AR book tests that kids take while they read. This is a resource that provides information on the books, and it has word counts and all of that. And we'll look at that in a minute. The other resource is What Kids Are Reading. And I'll provide a copy of this. I'll put a link in the comments to this deck, so you'll have these links. This is a report by Renaissance that talks about what books kids are reading, and we'll look briefly at the report in a moment. But it's a great way to see what's popular right now, what books kids are pulling off the shelves. You'd be surprised how many of the books are books that have been out a while. They're not all recently released books that are all still really popular. And then the last tool, and this is one that I definitely use every single day, is the ATOS Analyzer. And this will actually allow you to upload your manuscript, and it will tell you what the reading level is, the word count, all of that, so you can compare it to other books that you may be trying to write in the same sort of style or the same age group for. So let's start with the Accelerated Reader Book Finder. So you can put in a book title, or you can put in an author. We will put in NWA NorCal's own Beth McMullen and look at her Mrs. Smith's for Spy School series books. Oops. Oh my. I've never had it actually fail on me before. So sorry about that. There we go. Let's see here. So here you can see all the entries and it has all of her various books. You can click on a title and it'll give you the book level. So this is for middle grades and it comes back with a book level of 4.3. This is the test, the number of points you'd get if you took the test as a student. And it has the word count. And so if you wanted an idea of about, roughly for the books that you're looking at and comparing yours to what the word count is, this is a great way to do that. In addition to that, there is, as I mentioned, the What Kids Are Reading report. So the 21 edition is available. If you click the link in the presentation, you'll be able to go out to the website and register, and that will allow you to download the report. And I'll just jump ahead here really quickly to the report, but it will show what's popular by state. You see a lot of Dave Pilkey books here with his Dogman series. And then it gives you a breakdown of the top print books, top digital books by grade level. And so you can go kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and so forth, and it'll tell you what all of those are. So a really great resource for looking at what's popular, what kids are reading and enjoying. And then you could actually take this list to the library and go check these books out, read them as mentor texts while you're working on your own work. And then the last piece is the ATOS for books. And so this is where you can actually go in and enter your own manuscript. And so I put in a portion of a book that I was working on earlier this year that'll be out next year. And you submit that and it will actually parse the text in the file and then give you a report of where yours falls. So here you'll see the ATOS book level is a 3.5. The thing I uploaded was about 10,000 words total. And it also gives you like the average word length and the average sentence length. Generally, the word length and the sentence length will drive the book level. So if you have really long sentences or if you're using really long words, you'll get a higher book level. If you're using really short words, really short sentences, you'll get a much lower level. So those are great resources. And as I said, those are here in the deck, and you'll be able to download that from the comments after the presentation today. So before we wrap up, I did want to talk a little bit about violence because people always ask about that. And as in publishing, the answer to the question, how much violence is okay in a middle grade or chapter book, is it depends. And I really truly have found that to be true. I actually had a manuscript a couple of years ago that went to 2 different editors. And one editor came back and said, we can't really do something with a murder in the book. So maybe we could have the person be missing or something like that. The other editor came back and said, yeah, so this is a great murder mystery. We really like it, but you had the murder occur off screen. And we really wanted to know if that's something that we could bring into the book. And so it just depends on your comfort level, what you want to put into the book. And then you have to do the work, obviously, to find an agent and an editor who also feel the same way and feel like it's something that can be sold. But it really is up to you. I remind people all the time that some of the most popular middle grade books, things like the Percy Jackson series, Harry Potter, all that, are rife with violence. So it's not that violence can't be done in these books. It's really a matter of how it's done and then finding the right publisher who is willing to publish something like that. So where do I go from here? That was the question I asked back in October of 2015 when I decided I wanted to write kids' books. And so I got a lot of advice and I want to share some of it with you. So you're here today watching this, so thank you. And so if you want to write mysteries for kids, one of the first things I would say is start with Mystery Writers of America. It's a really inclusive and welcoming group of writers that I was first acquainted with them when I started writing for adults. And had just a wonderful time with the organization, and now am thankful and grateful to be able to be an active published member of Mystery Writers of America. The second is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And I know there's been a lot of talk lately about issues and strife within the organization, but SCBWI is still one of the best resources and communities of writers for children that exists, and you can learn a lot. If you don't necessarily want to join the organization, you can pay a non-member fee to attend a lot of their events and most of their local events. And here in Northern California, there are actually 4 different SCBWI groups. And most of those events are anywhere from $10 to $20 to $25. So they're not terribly expensive. So if you see an event that really appeals to you, but you don't necessarily want to join the organization, you can still pay to attend that event. And then in terms of getting more education, Children's Book Insider is a great resource. It's published monthly. It actually includes an above the slush pile opportunity every month where you can submit to an agent or editor and bypass their slush pile. And they provide a lot of great insight and interviews, both on craft and also on the business of writing, how to get your work in front of people, how to promote your work once it's sold, those kinds of things. And then there are a number of places you can take classes. The Highlights Foundation provides a lot of classes, both on site in Pennsylvania as well as online. The Children's Book Academy and Storyteller Academy and Writing Barn all provide excellent courses. The Writing Barn, again, has classes that you can do on site in Texas, and they also do a lot online. And then lastly, I'd recommend going out and looking at the list of Edgar winners and nominees for Best Juvenile Mystery. If you go to theedgars.com, there's a whole list there, and you can go through, check out all of those books. They're all wonderful books, and I think really also a great way to kind of get your head around sort of what mysteries for middle grade and younger kids look like. In addition to that, there's some MWA resources that would be great to check out. The MWA does pretty much yearly, I believe, an anthology of stories. Over the last few years, they've done 2 that were focused on middle grade. One was edited by R.L. Stein, the other by Chris Gravenstein. And in the interest of full disclosure, I actually have a short story in Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries. But that's another great way, again, to read some stories by a lot of different authors with a lot of different styles and see what's really working in the middle grade space, how characterization is done, different things like that. And they're short stories, so they're easy to read and kind of quick to get through, but would give you kind of a broad view of what writing for kids looks like, and you can kind of compare that to writing for adults and so forth. The other resource came out earlier this year. It was edited by Lee Child with MWA NorCal's own Lori R. King. And that's How to Write a Mystery. It has wonderful information on crafting mysteries, creating characters, and there's an entire section on writing mysteries for kids. So I would encourage you to check that out. And then lastly, I provided a little reading list here. Won't go into great detail with it, except to say that with the chapter books, I've included, in addition to a lot of mystery chapter books, some other really popular ones, just so you can get an idea of style. And then with the middle grade series and the standalones, check those out. Again, some of these are Edgar nominated. I will point out, if you are interested in, or if you remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books, Case Closed, the series by Laura Magaziner, is an excellent example of using that motif in a mystery. And so you get to make all the choices, do all the investigation. They're a lot of fun. Kids love them. And it's a really interesting way to tell a story. So as I said, this will be posted so you can pull down the reading list and check these out, and check out others as well. So that's everything. If you want to hear more or see more about me, you can visit me online. But I think we will stop sharing here and we can take some questions.
Okay, I actually have a question. When you were showing, it was the ATOS, I think the analyzer, you have like a book level at like 3.5. Is that like the middle of 3rd grade? Is that what that means?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some overlap. And so they have, they do a little bit of overlap here. Let me share it real fast. Share. Okay. So this is the page, yeah. So it was 3.5. And then if you scroll down, it gives you a table. And so you can see based on where the table is, you can go all the way up to 3.3 in first grade, and all of that. And so you can just use that to see, okay, well, these are kind of the grades that these correspond to. And so for every analysis you do, it will bring up this table and it will show you where the book falls.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Claire had a question, Claire Johnson. She says, I'm writing a YA and it's geared towards 17 to 18-year-olds with language that might be objectionable for a 12-year-old. When sending out a query, should I stress that it's for the older YA market?
So the thing about YA is once you get into YA, even, fairly young YA, really all bets are off. And so I think if you make it clear, hey, this is a YA novel, they expect to sort of see pretty much anything. And what they will do is generally the publishers will decide where it falls. There's this whole new category of books that they're talking about now where they're calling them new adult. And what they may end up doing, Claire, is they may end up saying, hey, this looks more like a new adult novel than a YA. But what it sounds like it would probably just be a YA. Generally, the new adult novels tend to be with characters that are a bit older, kind of in like the 19, 20, 21 range. But based on the age, it would probably stick with YA. And like I said, all bets are off in terms of what you would see in a YA novel. So it would just be making sure it's clear it's YA, so you don't have a middle grade kid picking it up.
What kinds of crimes are appropriate for chapter books and middle grade mysteries? What's the difference there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in a lot of chapter books, you'll see there's a lot of theft in chapter books. Not a lot of sort of violent crime, obviously. And so you'll have a lot of theft. Sabotage tends to be a thing. So I, for example, I have a book coming out next year where the main character is a soccer goalie and she gets a bunch of stuff. Her stuff is sabotaged. Her uniform gets splattered with paint and different things like that. You tend to see a lot of that in the chapter book area. And so that, of course, requires a lot of creativity because, how many different ways can you tell a theft story? In middle grade, you see a lot of the same things. I always tell people it's sort of the same, but bigger. And so where in a chapter book, it may be that somebody has stolen this is actually a chapter book I read once. Somebody stole the skeleton from the science room at school. In a middle grade, it may be something like, somebody has stolen some, priceless artifact out of a big museum or something like that. And so it's really, the difference isn't so much the crimes, it's sort of the size and scope of the crime that's different.
Okay. From Claire, do you feel that the pandemic has seen an explosion in reading by children in YA?
I had this conversation with somebody 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I think it has. As much as we talk about how much time we've all spent on Zoom and how much time everybody's been streaming and getting caught up on TV shows from the 80s and 90s that we never got to watch back then, a lot of people are reading, not just YA. A lot of young people are reading, a lot of adults are reading. And so I think we're seeing that in the books that are being sold. Over the last year and a half, we're still seeing a huge uptick in sales for books. I think what has slowed down a little bit is the pace of the publishing industry itself, which is hard because the publishing industry was already pretty slow to start with. But it's difficult. I mean, editors and agents are going through all the same things we are. It's a stressful time. It's difficult. And a lot of writers, because they've been home, have had a lot more time to write. And so I've had a lot of editors tell me that, they've gotten, double or 4 times the number of submissions that they normally get, and wading through all of those. And I'm hearing the same thing from agents as well. So I think the pace of publishing has slowed. I think the rate at which people are reading has not.
This, what you just said goes right in to the next question, and that's from Marcia Fife. Um, Hi, thank you, great talk. What's the best way to find an agent for this type of book?
So that's a great question. And it allows me to talk a little bit about more about SCBWI. So one of the benefits you get when you join SCBWI is this thing that is very creatively called the book. And the book is great. They call it the Essential Guide for Publishing for Children, and it includes market surveys. So, who's buying what. It also has lists of agents and editors. So you can see what editors are buying the kinds of things like you write. And you can also look through and find agents that represent the kinds of things that you write. It's free to SCBWI members. You can get a digital copy. Every couple of years I pay, I think it's like $5 or $6 to have a physical copy shipped to me. But it's really worth having. It's a great resource. In the absence of that, you can also use a manuscript wish list. And a lot of agents use that to post what kinds of manuscripts they're interested in representing. And they have some pretty robust search features. So you can go out and you can search for agents that represent chapter books, agents that represent mysteries, middle grade, what have you. I also write graphic novels. And so I did look one day. I was just curious to see if there was a listing to do that, and they have the ability to search for people who represent graphic novels. So those are probably the two best resources I would say, other than sort of wandering Twitter. A lot of agents post their manuscript wish list to Twitter, but you have to find them there. And so something like the book or manuscript wish list is a great way to do that.
A few more questions. Do you have suggestions for making sure that the kids are able to solve the mystery without help from adults?
Yeah, so like I was saying, it's important to get the adults out of the way, and that's true in for the characters in the story as well as for the kids reading the books themselves. And I think it just goes back to creating characters that have skills that they can bring to bear to solve the mystery. So, for example, I have a story coming out next year where one of the sleuths is into robotics. And she is also, as a part of the robotics team, is responsible for documenting, taking pictures of everything and all of that. And so she's a very observant person. And so she's able to use her powers of observation, the pictures that she's taken and different things like that, and kind of piece together what's happened because she had that skill. And so I think it comes back to, within the books, characterization. In terms of making it fair for readers, I think it's also important, like I said, to be fair. And so the clues have to be on the page. There can be red herrings. Like I said, you can have unreliable narrators. You just have to make sure that you're creating clues that can be interpreted correctly or incorrectly, but that at least at the end, somebody could go back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I get it. And then that way, if the kids feel like they've been treated fairly, they can be satisfied with the mystery. If they feel like you cheated, they're going to feel cheated.
Okay. And we have one last question, and this is again from Marissa Fife. How long does it typically take to write and publish one of these books?
Okay, so writing is kind of up to the author. I set as a goal for myself 500 words a day. And so, a 50,000 word novel, you can kind of look at that, and then there's revisions and all of that. And so most people I know that write a lot generally could write a middle grade mystery in a year or half a year, kind of depending on the time that they devote to it. For chapter books, I usually write the first draft of my chapter books in about 2 weeks. And again, I target about 500 words a day, but the chapters, so I try to keep my chapters to about 600 to 700 words. And so I usually write a chapter a day, and they're typically about 10 chapters. And so in about 10 days, I can get through that. So that's the writing part. The publishing part is a different story altogether. So, people give you a lot of advice about writing when you decide you want to be a writer. Nobody ever talks to you about the publishing part. And publishing is slow. And so the first part of publishing obviously is finding somebody to publish it. And so whether that means looking for an agent who then tries to find a publishing house, or submitting it to publishers that take unagented authors. But then, that process may take a while. And so it could be a month, it could be half a year, it could be a year. And then after that, there's the process of actually crafting the book, right? So there's the editing and then line editing and all of those different things, the cover artwork. In the case of my chapter books, they send the chapter books off to an illustrator to do illustrations for inside the chapter books. And so that can take a while. So I've had chapter books that took a year to get to market. I had a picture book. It's actually this one here on the shelf behind me that took 4 years to get to market. And so it really just sort of depends. That is one of the questions when you, before you sign with a publisher, you want to get some indication of what the publishing journey is going to look like once you've turned over the book.
This is Glenda, and I actually have a question based on something that I asked you earlier before we went online. And that is, I asked if you do this full time or if you have a job, because so many of us are working, and we sometimes look at other authors and say, well, they're lucky they get to do this, 8 hours a day. So
Right.
I'm just wondering what you're doing.
Yeah, so I have a full-time job. I'm a chief technologist for an IT services company. So I do consulting work for all of our clients are state and federal agencies. And so I do that in the daytime, and then I generally write at night. Sometimes if I'm really inspired, I might get up in the morning and write before work, but that's generally not the case. I usually write at night. And so, yeah, it's a kind of a balancing act to do the writing and the work. And there are days, I say, my goal is 500 words a day. There are days where I'm like, hey, I'm taking a vacation today on my writing. And so you just have to do what's best for you and what works. It's hard. And like I said, this has been, the last year and a half has been challenging for everybody. And I just always tell people, take the time and space that you need. There's no one journey to publishing. And so do what works and feels right for you, because if it's comfortable for you and it's something you feel like you can stick with, then I feel like you can get to a point where you'll get published. If you overextend yourself, you're going to burn out. And I think that's a clear way that you'll stand in the way of reaching the success that you want.
Well, I think that is the last question. I'm going to pop back on here. And I just want to thank you, Bryan. This has been really interesting. You've kind of given me the impetus to maybe I can try this. I think of all the books I read when I was a kid and how captivating they were. And now I know a little bit of how you put them together.
Yeah.
So
And I would say also, it's a fun group to write for. You and I were talking earlier about getting in front of people and talking. Kids are a fun group to write for, and it's really rewarding to have the opportunity to talk to them about what you've written. So yeah, if it's something that interests you, I would encourage you to go do it.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for watching our Facebook Saturday Live. And as I mentioned, there'll be a video of this within like 2 minutes after we sign off. So if you know somebody who wasn't able to see it now, make sure that they know the video's up and they can watch it anytime they want. 24/7. And then we will see you back here in November with our next Facebook Saturday Live. Again, thanks, Bryan.
Thank you.
See you guys later.
Bye, everybody.